This is the first event of the new Centre for Modern Monarchy, which has been recently set up, and it's a pretty opportune time. And I think probably one of the very small silver linings of the pandemic is that within sort of 48 hours, you can pull together an event on Zoom with fantastic panelists and a large audience to debate and discuss the issues of the day. And that's what we've tried to do here. And it has been quite a week. Walter Bagehot, who was the grand old man of the English Constitution, he argued in the past that the monarchy was the dignified element of the British system. But of course, nothing seems that dignified at the present, with arguments raging over racism, money, mental health, taxes, protection, and media coverage. The royal family, of course, are in a bind, as we've seen. The never explain, never complain mantra of the past seems out of date in this new 24/7 multimedia environment. Public opinion could turn away from the monarchy, and Prince Charles will find himself taken over, certainly in a very different world than his mother encountered in the 1950s. Now, as a historian of monarchy, I can say that when it comes to monarchy, events move quickly, but change, I think, comes slowly. And whilst that perhaps is sustainable in days gone by with that slower pace of news and more rigid means of engaging public debate, now in a world of fast-paced multimedia platform, events create instant reactions and immediate demands for discernible change. And so, as we approach the end of this week, events have indeed provoked an instant reaction, and immediate demands for change grow louder. But what about that change? What should it be? When should it happen? How far and in what ways? Those are the kinds of questions I think we will be reflecting on this evening. And I'm delighted to be joined by an absolutely stellar panel who have given up their time at the end of a very busy week and at very short notice. So starting there with Jennie Bond, who probably needs little introduction. She is the royal correspondent. Well, she's not now, but she kind of is. She always was. She's the BBC royal correspondent. She was during the 1990s for 14 years. She reported on many a royal crisis through those 1990s, and she remains on the airwaves broadcasting today. We have Dr. Ed Owens there, author and historian. His recent book, The Family Firm, Monarchy, Mass Media and the British Public, 1932-53, explores, well, the relationship between what have been natural bedfellows, the monarchy and the media. We have Ben Page, Chief Executive of IPSO Mori, who have conducted, of course, over time, lots of polls on the monarchy and the royal family, including one this week, which we will be talking about. Ayesha Hazarika, broadcaster, journalist, political commentator, formerly political advisor to the Labour Party. She now has her own Times radio show, which I was lucky enough to be invited on at the weekend. And Graham Smith, CEO of Republic, which calls for the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of an elected head of state. So welcome to you all. Let's just begin by going around and getting your thoughts, I suppose, on the interview, the palace statement, the public reaction, just all of that. Jennie, should we come to you first? Quite a week. You've been very busy. What are your kind of key takeaways and key thoughts about it?
Yes, it has been one heck of a week. I think it's been a very sad week. I mean, first, if you just look at the family, they're showing their dysfunctionality again. It's so sad to see two brothers who've been through so much together at war with one another, and a rift between father and son. So it's been very sad, I think. I think it's been extraordinarily painful and hurtful all around. The one positive I can see out of it is that it has provoked a nationwide debate about racism, and we should look at ourselves, and about mental health. That's about the only positive. Constitutionally, insignificant. We're not talking here about anyone who's ever going to be king or queen. There's never going to be a King Harry, a Queen Meghan, so nothing changes.
I feel I have to go immediately to Graham Smith, from Republic, who I think might hope that at least it might be slightly different than you're suggesting. Graham, what are your thoughts on this, and how optimistic now are you for somebody who's been calling for the abolition of the monarchy? Is this a kind of prime moment, or is this something that will pass and you'll be back to the uphill struggle of campaigning in the UK for the abolition? Oh, you're on mute, Graham.
I was saying the other day that the phrase "you're still muted" is going to be the phrase of the decade, I think. But I would disagree with one of the last comments that Jennie said about this isn't about someone who's going to be king, because a lot of this is about the next king and the one after, because there are a lot of questions about their role, Charles and William, in all this. There are a lot of questions still as to who was it that made these racist comments, who was it that should have been rallying to Meghan's aid. They've said it wasn't the Queen and Philip that were at fault, and so it does raise a lot of doubts. We are now getting towards the end of the Queen's reign now, and I would say that a lot of the support for the monarchy and a lot of the reason why it sustained what I would say is high but fairly shallow levels of support is the Queen. She is this kind of human firewall around it, and that the deference that she gets and the unwillingness to criticize the Queen is not going to be inherited along with the throne and the crown by Prince Charles. And really, when the Queen is gone, the monarchy will be reduced to King Charles, Prince William, and the wayward son and brother on the other side of the Atlantic. And that's going to be a very different, rather threadbare looking monarchy that is not protected from the kind of scrutiny that it really does deserve. So I think in terms of the interview, I think it was pretty, I think it's extremely damaging. I think that it's also damaging on issues of race and mental health. I think it has undone some of the work that even people like William and Harry have sought to do over the last few years. And I think that the response from the palace was tone deaf and pretty appalling, really, because the Runnymede Trust was saying yesterday, BLM leaders have been saying, there was an opportunity for the Queen to show some leadership, to unequivocally condemn racism, but it was all just, well, this is all very unfortunate, we didn't know this was going on, and everyone can now mind their own business because we're going to deal with this behind closed doors. I think that if you took all of this and you relocated it in the world of Westminster politics, there would already have been resignations and demands for greater clarity and all the rest of it. So I think that was, I think the statement was just, it's almost as if BLM and all the mental health stuff had never happened. It's like, it was quite extraordinary. It also, I've been saying that it's one of the most serious crises they faced since 1936, and the most common reaction that I've had is, well, what about Prince Andrew? I would say that Prince Andrew is the biggest scandal, but this is the bigger crisis, and one of the reasons is because it throws a spotlight back on Andrew, who has been protected. They circled the wagons. They said he's not going to America, but yes, he'll cooperate / not cooperate with the FBI, and we'll just send him off to play golf on his own time. And yet they were very quick to jump on Meghan last week when the accusations were against her, and were very poor in their response to this. So I think a lot of people are looking at this and saying, well, it's an interesting set of priorities that you have there as an institution. So I could talk for the next hour on this without pause, but I won't. But I will say that I think it sets the scene for an incredibly difficult decade ahead, and one that I am increasingly optimistic will lead to a situation where I don't think the monarchy will go in the next decade, but I think it will make it incredibly difficult for Charles to be succeeded by another monarch.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Ed, Graham mentioned sort of looking back, referenced the abdication crisis. Can you perhaps give us your reflections through the prism of, being a modern historian and historian of monarchy at the turn of the 20th century?
Well, I came to the interview on Monday evening as a historian who's explored the evolution of the relationship between the monarchy on the one hand and the media on the other, and what was once a very deferential relationship, even in the decade of the abdication crisis. Those journalists newspaper men and women that cover the story were very deferential in the way they covered it. That relationship has turned increasingly toxic, especially among certain sections of the press. And what I was fascinated with when they talked about it on Monday evening was the discussion of just how poisonous this relationship had become with the British tabloid press. Now, it's an old narrative that's part of a royal PR strategy to talk about, if you like, the burdens of being in public life, the negative elements of exposure in public life. But nevertheless, there definitely were racialized and a racist tone of coverage in the approach to Harry and Meghan. I think denial of that has claimed 2 scalps this week, one now infamous GMB presenter, and also the Society of Editors, who denied racism within the tabloid press. So I'm left wondering after the interview, is it going to act as a moment of change in terms of this relationship between the media on the one hand and the royals on the other?
I've done the thing that no one's supposed to do. I was going to say, Ayesha, we should probably put that question to you. Reflecting on the media and the monarchy, and Graham talked about in Westminster, this would have already claimed some scalps. What's your assessment of this?
The only thing I'd say about it's very rare for a scalp to get claimed in Westminster now. We do live in an age where you could literally take someone hostage and still remain like as a senior cabinet minister. So I think we're in a slightly different situation. But you're right, this has exploded a big question. It's moved from being a family crisis to an institutional crisis to a media crisis, and it's shining a light up at a bigger social crisis, particularly in light of the Black Lives Matter. And I think the thing that Jennie said was a feeling of sadness. And I think that's what so many people feel, particularly people who are a bit younger. And I think people also from Black and Asian and ethnic minority communities, because when Meghan and Harry got married, I say this absolutely genuinely, it did feel like a kind of a moment which matched the Olympic Games, that opening ceremony. For so many of us, it was a feeling of just intense love, joy, pride, and affection in this country. And the fact that the premier country, the top family in the country, was opening itself up to modernity and being a bit more progressive and opening its, hearts and its arms and its with the royal family to this woman, Meghan Markle. And I just remember being so struck by how many, particularly young women of colour, got in touch with me as a journalist saying, I have never given a fig about the royal family, but I am really interested now and I want to know all about this woman Meghan, and this is like amazing. So the fact that it turned from this fairy tale to this nightmare so quickly, I think the speed at which that happened has been really deeply traumatic for people, particularly people of colour, who felt that this was a sign that this country was progressing, we were becoming more tolerant. It was like, progress is always on this kind of trajectory of going forward. So I think it's been really profoundly I mean, I watched the interview on Monday. I watched lots of the clips, obviously, overnight from Sunday. And I was expected, being a cynical journalist, being a political advisor, I've been around for a long time. I was kind of thinking, I've seen all the best bits. It's like a trailer for a film. You've seen the best bits. But actually sitting and watching it all, it was quite shocking and it was quite powerful and it was quite moving. And I do think that the two things that did come to the fore was, as everyone has said, mental health and racism. And I don't know how the royal family really rebuilds itself after this, because I have a lot of sympathy with what Graham said. We love the Queen as a nation, even people who are not hugely fans of the royal family. We admire her service, her duty, just her history. She's got this unique place in history. She's this golden thread that takes us from like Winston Churchill through wars, through technological change, through political change to where we are now. But I think when she passes, if the royal family does not sort itself out, where is that natural affection going to come from? Tell me, what is the struggle that Charles has really gone through? The Queen's narrative is about selfless service from this really, really young woman, almost marrying the state. Charles's narrative is really himself. Toxic relationship with Diana, this doomed love affair with Camilla, then marrying Camilla, a bit of organic farming, and now falling out with his son over Meghan. I mean, that's a hard kind of sort of story for the whole country to get behind. So I think I think the royal family is in a lot of trouble over this, but I do think it points to bigger divides in society. We live in this really polarized society. And what's, I think, fascinating and kind of depressing is that Megxit has become the new Brexit in terms of just how polarized this country is.
Yeah, there's loads to pick up there, Ayesha. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Ben, you've been kind of observing popular attitudes, both in the last few days, but more broadly. Where are your reflections on this?
Well, I do think, I mean, I'm a historian, so it's nice to be of historians as well as the chief executive of Ipsos Mori, having been doing this since I was 5 years old for the last 33 years. I think what you can, I mean, and I do, for those of us who lived through and Jennie will perhaps comment on this, for those of us who lived through the Diana Charles stuff in the 1990s, culminating obviously in the divorce and her death, compared to that, this seems to, it really does fade into insignificance in my view. And I do think we need to take the long view. If you go back to the 19th century, the king would go through London in a carriage before one of the kings, before Queen Victoria, and people would be throwing things at the carriage. The Tsar speaks to him and says, why are you allowing these people to do this? Why aren't they killed? And he's, well, it's England. So I think we need to, we do need to keep a sense of perspective. Overall, support for a republic has been pretty constant at about 1 in 5. There is an age difference in terms of who supports Meghan Markle and who supports the palace in all of this, with younger people and obviously ethnically diverse people much more supportive of Meghan Markle. But overall, I'm not sure this is going to be, this particular episode is going to be fundamental. I think much more crucial will be the transition to Prince Charles and how that goes, how long Prince Charles is actually on the throne, because at the moment, of course, his son is much more popular than him. But they have a way of reinventing themselves. It's like capitalism. We constantly talk about its overthrow and its collapse, and it constantly reinvents itself. And the monarchy, I think, is an institution where, a bit like the BBC and the civil service, actually, we sort of think sometimes it's unchanging, but actually, just in my lifetime, I'm 56. It's completely changed. And I thought the marriage of Meghan and Harry, of course, was another brilliant example of modernization. And clearly, that's all gone sour. But we do need to sort of take a step back. So we are polling to see what reactions have been. The snap polls were 2-1 in favor of the firm as opposed to Meghan and Harry. But really, we're all here talking about this. I think I'd look again in a month or two to form a view.
Thanks, Ben. Jennie, can we just go back to you? I wanted to kind of ask you to reflect on the comparison with the 1990s, which Ayesha mentioned. And I suppose one obvious difference is the element of racism here. I mean, I wonder how you rank this particular crisis relative to that and in a longer view.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. I think the Diana crisis was much greater. It went on for a very long time. It was equally poisonous, but we were talking after her Panorama interview about whether Charles was fit to be king, because that's what she said. She said, I don't know if he can do this top job, as she called it. And there was a huge national debate about whether he could or he couldn't. And as with the abdication crisis, we had a new king overnight. And here it seemed that maybe the crown was going to have to skip a generation. Here, those issues don't apply. Harry is 6th in line to the throne. He's stepped down from royal duties. He's no longer part of the official firm. So we just haven't got those questions arising. Therefore, in my view, it is less constitutionally important.
And I wonder about just the question of change. I mean, I think Ben is, certainly that would be my reading, that, the monarchy changes very slowly. It does change. It has to evolve to survive. But I suppose the challenge here is, what's the evidence going to be of that change? The palace statement clearly emphasised, as far as possible, they want to make this a family matter to be resolved behind closed doors. But of course, they are not a private family. There is going to be comment and scrutiny. And even today, Prince William was asked, are your family racist? And, and had to come out, and well, he didn't have to, but he chose to. He came out with the, response, no. So what can they do to signal that they are changing? I don't know.
But I think it, yeah. I mean, I think it's more. There are these moments when it's a bit like the Queen doing the going to the Olympics with James Bond and pretending to jump out of a helicopter. These are amazing moments, and so it isn't necessarily going to be instantaneous. But let's see what charities they're supporting, what events they go to. Let's see who's getting honours. I think it's it's a series of the evolution of the monarchy is through. There are set pieces, marriages, weddings, jubilees, etc. But then there are it's these. There are lots of symbols. I think it's they are a symbol. So I think we are sitting here poring over it, but it will take a long time to assess really what has shifted. But the big event will of course be the death of the Queen, and potentially given the politics of the United Kingdom and the politics of Scotland, how Charles handles that, assuming Charles is in good health when this happens. And there is because we are in a period where there is a real risk of the end of the United Kingdom, and that the coincidence of the Queen in the end of the Queen in at that point it could be massive, to be quite honest. That's the thing I would be looking at in all of this, not Meghan and Harry actually.
Can I come back in, because I mean, this whole thing about modernization of the monarchy, it hasn't really changed. That's the problem. It's pretty much the same. What they've modernized is their PR. They've become much better at PR. That's not the same as modernizing the institution. It's still compared by many historians as being more secretive than MI5 and the CIA. It's still doing all the things it's always done in terms of demanding access to public money, to government ministers, to not wanting to complain or explain. And I've been saying all week, well, I'm sorry, but not wanting to explain is not good enough in a democratic society. Now, going back to the comparison with 1997, as I was saying, the big issue here is the Queen. In 1997, someone who had entered the royal family, not been born into it, then left it, and tragically then died, and the Queen was still there. The boys were still young. They had their adult life ahead of them. There's plenty of time to reinvent their PR and to recover their position. This crisis, which has done significant damage in terms of, particularly with the younger generations, is at the end of the Queen's reign, when we are looking towards a succession to someone who, as Ayesha was saying, just does not have that same story or that same compelling link with the past. So, and on the polling, yes, it is roughly 1 in 5 that support a republic, which is not bad given that, the issue is not generally talked about in an intelligent and serious way most of the time. But we did polling in the run-up, just 1 week with YouGov, in the run-up to the Meghan and Harry wedding. 2/3 of the population were simply not interested in the wedding. I mean, 75% of the population weren't interested, according to polls in the 2011 wedding. But we also asked a bunch of questions about attitudes towards the royals. The number of people that are really warm towards the Queen was a minority. The number of people that favoured one royal over another was always a minority. We did polling last week that said that last year, that if people are coming to visit your town, do you think the royals should pay themselves, or would you rather it didn't happen if you found the council or your police had to pay for it? 50% said that they would rather not pay. And in other words, the headline figure hides a much more complicated set of attitudes. And most people that I talk to, my bigger challenge is not persuading people to go from being monarchist to Republican. It's to persuade people to care one way or the other. And yes, I accept that Meghan marrying into the family changed some of that and engaged people, particularly people, Black and Asian people, who saw some diversity. But that's not modernizing an institution. That's one person marrying another person into the same institution as it's always been, and again, that collision of outsider with royal has failed spectacularly. And I think that is the big danger, that this perception of this spin around modernization and being more open has been exposed as a big lie, because the institution does not modernize, it doesn't change, and that's why you have these collisions, because they're not prepared to adapt and alter the way that they behave towards people.
Yeah, I think that's, I want to come back to the question of modernization and what, if that's possible when you're talking about an anachronistic institution like monarchy. We'll come back to that. But Ayesha and then Ben just wanted to come in. Ayesha.
Yes, please, as well, Anna.
And then Ed.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Ayesha.
I suppose I just want to push back on the point that just because this is not an actual constitutional crisis, and Ben and Jennie are correct, Harry was never, the chances of him being king were very, very, very slim. It does not mean that this is not a really fundamental moral crisis for the royal family. And nobody's expecting the pillars of the temple to come down, because that's just not what happens in this country and in this society. But that doesn't mean that people are just feeling pretty kind of horrified at what they've seen. Obviously, there's the issue of race, and I know a lot of people are going, oh, well, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Well, for a lot of us, and by the way, I'm Asian, I'm Muslim, I'm not Black. There isn't a Black person on this panel. So we're not quite reflecting how many people in the Black community feel about this. But certainly from my perspective, and also even speaking to my family, in India, as part of the Commonwealth, one of the takeaways is that for the first time in modern history, you had a biracial couple in the royal family, and it looks like they were hounded out of not just the family, but the country, right? This does not reflect well on the royal family. Yes, nobody's saying that the royal family is going to crumble, sorry, Graham, but it doesn't paint the royal family in a very good light, particularly with the Commonwealth and obviously America. It's going to be very interesting when Charles does his next big trip to America, or William and Kate do their big trip to America, because there is a divide there. And the final thing on this is, for families like myself, right, I'm in my mid-40s now, my parents came here as immigrants. Many immigrants who came here love the royal family, right? We have crockery still with the royal family's face on it. It's really traditional. But people like us, like our communities, who again just, have pictures of the Queen and things, we just feel really hurt by it. And I just want to put that on record, because yes, it's not a firm constitutional crisis, but I do think it is a bit of a moral crisis.
Yeah, thank you for making that point, Ayesha. I did invite a panelist from Black panelists, but unfortunately they were unable to make it. So I'm aware of the fact that we don't represent a cross section of views. So I appreciate that point. Thank you. Ben and then Ed.
Well, the one thing about the transition to Charles, if he is going to ever be king, is that it's a bit like being prime minister, and you don't know how somebody will perform in the role until they get it. We can make assumptions from what we know about him, etc. But there's about 1 person in 5 in most organizations who immediately somebody becomes the CEO will think they're great and do what they say. I mean, I've seen it in my own life. I mean, in running any organization, you should always try and find these people and work them to death, because they will actually do what they immediately respect the job or the title, not the person. So I mean, there is still an element of that. There's still 29% of people in Britain who believe the people in charge know best. Good God. So I think we don't know, and but let's see. But I do agree that Britain is changing. 1/3 of children at school are from, are not white British, or Black or Asian, and therefore the population is changing. But overall, we haven't come to this yet, but I'm sure we will. Do you want the equivalent of Donald Trump or Boris Johnson as elected president? And I think that is something that is we haven't talked about yet, but that is also part of the attraction of the monarchy.
Yeah, we will head in the direction of the modernisation of monarchy, and then the question of the alternatives in a moment. I want to turn to Ed, and then I'm going to pick up some questions from the chat before we turn to that section. Ed.
Thank you, Anna. I'm anxious that I don't get ahead of myself, but I wanted to just pick up on a couple of points made by Graham and Ben regarding, well, first of all, how big a challenge or crisis is this moment, as opposed to, for example, the moment of transition when it comes to the succession. of King Charles, presumably the third. Now, I don't think there is any great desire on the part of the British public to rid themselves of the monarchy, and to some extent that inertia, I think, will ensure continuity through this moment. I don't see it as a major crisis. I think the story of the monarchy's evolution, certainly since the 1950s, can in part be attributed to a failure on the part of some politicians and some members of the public, really to fully come to terms with sort of Britain's reduced sort of role in the world. And the monarchy has sort of ridden a certain wave of success based on that. For them, the monarchy has bolstered Britain's image, even if it hasn't increased Britain's sort of power within wider geopolitics. So I think that's important. I think the other issue is, where's Brexit in all of this? If that doesn't go well, where does the monarchy sit then? You know, arguably the monarchy might gain even greater stature if Brexit isn't a success, because it will become something that people want to continue to celebrate in order to celebrate an idea of an older British greatness. Just on the succession, clearly that process is already underway. Already we see Charles fulfilling a certain number of roles that would once have been performed by the Queen herself. And I actually think the future monarchy rests to a much greater extent on the shoulders of the Cambridges. I think provided they can continue to project the image of family life that they have to up until this point, and continue to do the work that they do in public life, I think what will be quite a short reign probably of King Charles will pass, and there'll be a huge amount of expectation as to what the then reign of William brings.
Thanks, Ed. Jennie, I want to bring you back in. I want to also pick up some of the questions in the chat. One of the sort of questions which perhaps we can deal with is the question of Harry and Meghan, and, you know, how likely is it that Meghan wouldn't have been able to access mental health support? And I know you've sort of written about this week, suggesting, you know, you were surprised yourself that there wasn't the means for her to get that. So do you want to just perhaps respond to that and any points that you wanted to feed into the discussion we've just been having?
Yeah, well, I do think it's inconceivable that she couldn't access help. First of all, let me say I have great sympathy with Meghan. I felt very sorry for her when I watched that whole interview go out. And I, with many other people, most of the country, welcomed the marriage and the fact that we had an American of dual heritage, and all she represented in a modern monarchy would be great. But how is it possible that when Harry himself has had therapy, he's had psychiatrists in, and they've spearheaded mental health campaigns, how is it possible that she couldn't do that? I don't know why she went to someone in the palace. I certainly don't know why she went to human resources. It seemed very odd. But there are faults in the palace. I'm not here to defend the monarchy. I'm a journalist. Clearly there are faults in the institution, and I hope, I would have liked mental health to be mentioned in the Queen's statement. It wasn't, but I hope that investigations are going on as to who did Meghan go to, what was said, and if someone said, no, you can't be helped, then, you know, they should be held to account. Just on some other points, well, Graham and I always cross swords. I do think the monarchy has modernized, even in the time that I've been covering it, some 30 years. Just some small examples that now they are accountable. The accounts are published, and you go through them, you can see how much they spend on their laundry, how much they spend on a bunch of flowers. You can see all of that in the most boring detail every year. And the whole tenure, really, of monarchy has changed, of the royal family. They're so much more informal, largely due to William and Harry, and when they're out and about, and Diana. I mean, she changed the image of monarchy, and it's much more accessible. Reporters get much more access than they ever used to. And one last point, I suppose, actually it's a big point, because this whole debate, the whole crisis seems to revolve around a racist in the royal family. We're all taking it as read, the paper certainly, that there is a racist in the royal family. I do think the context of the remark needs to be investigated. I don't think we're going to, unfortunately, be party to that investigation, but I hope within the family they will. Clearly, from what the Queen said, that recollections may vary. Clearly, whoever it is, has spoken to the Queen now, has said, I don't remember it that way. I don't know what they've said, but they've said something and their version is different. And that happens in families. Could it be curiosity or was it concern? Are both equally offensive to be curious? So many women of colour in mixed marriages have come on the airways to say, well, of course we talked about it. Yeah, we talked about what tone our baby would have, what skin tone. So I think, you know, we're kind of hanging someone out to dry before it's actually been proved.
Can I jump in
you
here?
look like you want to come in there, Ayesha. I'm just bringing you in.
Yeah, just very quickly, just on that, Jenny, I'm sorry, I'm going to push back on that because I myself have biracial nieces and nephews, and of course, before they come along, you're like, oh, I wonder what they're going to look like. You could tell from Harry's body language that was not a kind of just gentle conversation going, oh, is he going to have a ginger afro? Or, you know, that was definitely not the tone of the conversation. And when you say there is one racist running around the royal family, no, that is a that's like saying there's one bad apple in, like, you know, in the police, or there is there's overt racism, and there's institutional racism. There is institutional racism in every part of society. The Macpherson report coined the phrase about the Metropolitan Police after the murder of Stephen Lawrence. Every institution in this country has got a degree of institutional racism. There is no question that the palace will be absolutely the top of that tree. The way she was treated, the way stories were leaked about her, there was clearly collusion between the palace and the press. She was singled out. It's not good enough. I'm really sorry, but I'm really going to push back on that. The idea that it was just one person running around and that they were sort of being, you know, curious. You could tell from Harry's body language that that was absolutely not the case. And
well, he looked very uncomfortable, I have to say. He said he was a bit shocked by the remark that had been made. He didn't use the word concern, but clearly something may have been said. I'm just saying, I think that we have got this explosion of criticism of the royal family, the institution of monarchy, and we don't know all the facts. I mean, you have to remember that Harry himself, you know, he called one of his army colleagues, he used the P word. He dressed up as a Nazi. But people do things wrong.
Can I jump in and push back here as well? Because I think part of the...
Just Graham, just let Ayesha finish the point and then you can
yeah,
comment.
absolutely. And I've just written about that. I mean, Harry was completely off the rails, and it actually shows you that this kind of talk is probably absolutely normal in the royal family. You just have to look at what Prince Philip says. I mean, half of it is comedy gold, but half of it is also like, oh my God, like I can't believe. I mean, it's quite good that he's, for his sake, that he's in hospital, so he's not the racist, clearly, in terms for once, you know, for once, poor man. But like, I think we just have to be honest about this, right? Britain has a lot of institutional racism in it. The palace is absolutely part of this. This story hasn't exploded because of all these nasty stories about the royal family. It's exploded because of all of these nasty stories about Meghan. And there was rank hypocrisy in terms of how she was written about compared to other people. And there was a racial element to it. So I just think, you know, again, I am the only person of colour on this on this panel, but you know, that is such a reading of it from a large section of society.
I mean, I appreciate that Graham wants to come in, but I mean, part of the challenge, surely, of modernising a monarchy is that the monarchy, by definition, I mean, it is institutionally racist. It's, you know, it's historically, when we look at the kind, you know, it's about inherited white privilege. I mean, you know, it's very difficult to get beyond the idea of the monarchy being, you know, but then, so can the royal family move away, even if they wanted to, and sort themselves out, as some of you have suggested? I mean, what can they do to somehow bring themselves into an acceptable vision of a family for the 21st century? I mean, they can't. And does that therefore mean that the monarchy itself is no longer fit for purpose and is simply, you know, on its last legs and will, you know, collapse, as it were, when the Queen dies? I mean, I wanted to turn to that modernisation point, but let's just, Graham wanted to come in on that and then we'll move to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. And I firstly just want to speak on this. There's a couple of things that Jenny said that I don't want to, you know, have a go at Jenny, but a lot of this has been said, and it was said also in the statement, which is casting doubt on what Meghan said. If someone goes on air and says that racist comments were made about you, you don't respond to that by saying, well, where's the evidence? I don't quite believe you. You try and find out what's going on, you take it seriously. If someone goes on air and says that they were so depressed they were thinking of killing themselves, you don't say, well, our recollection is different, we didn't know, and we don't say, well, it's, why didn't you go and get help? That help would have been there. You say, well, that is appalling, we need to find out. We do not push back on that person. We deal with it and take it very seriously. And I think this is part of the damage done by the statement, is that after all of these recent years of BLM and all the activism around mental health, all of a sudden that's undone by people publicly saying, well, actually, I don't believe you. You come out publicly and say that you're a victim of racism and that you've been seriously mentally ill. We're not interested. We think you're lying, or we at very least think that other people, you've misunderstood the situation or whatever it is. That's not really okay. And that's quite a serious problem. This is why I described that statement as pretty contemptuous from the palace, because it was doing pretty much in slightly different terms exactly what Piers Morgan was doing, which was casting doubt. It was essentially inviting the public to believe that Meghan was making it up, or at least mistaken, and then turning around and saying, well, no, to be honest, we're now going to deal with this privately, and it's not really any of your business. If I can just very quickly touch on this whole thing about modernization, and also pick up on this notion that there's no, I think the panel thinks that there's no chance of change, and I get that pollsters are looking at these polls and looking at the public opinion, but pollsters can tell us what has been and where people have been at, even if it's only yesterday or last week. But my job isn't to follow the polls, it's to change people's opinions. And I do see that what is happening is that the environment in which I work is far more fertile for changing people's minds than it ever has been. And one of the things that I was saying on Monday is this kind of very serious accusation against the royals is, as much as anything, a call to have a much more serious debate about the monarchy as we are tonight, rather than getting drawn into silly, pointless discussions about tourism and all the rest of it, which is nonsense. And it needs to be a serious sort of secular political discussion about the nature of our institutions. And I think that the big jarring fact is that this is an institution that does not represent or share the values of the rest of us. And going back again to the point that Ayesha was making, this sort of surprise that there might be a racist in the royal family. Yesterday, I Googled quite a number of royal members with the word racist or racism behind their name, and you will find articles against most of them of people being attacked for making racist statements. Now, Prince Philip has been doing it for years, referring to Chinese people as having slitty eyes. Prince Andrew was criticized not that long ago for making racist comments about Arabs whilst he is on official business on behalf of the government in the Middle East. There's a black woman that was working for Prince Charles 20 years ago who resigned because she was having pretty offensive racist remarks made against her, and Prince Charles wasn't interested in dealing with that, even though the accusations were against the most senior aides in his office. The Princess Michael of Kent was attacked for making racist remarks towards a group of black diners in a New York restaurant. This is commonplace, and it is not surprising. Even Harry on Monday acknowledged that he had to be taught about things like unconscious bias by Meghan. And he said, in the environment I grow up, you're not told about these things. You don't get it. So I think he has now got it. I think he, to be perfectly frank, I'm not a big fan of Harry and Meghan. It won't be a big surprise, but I certainly have more sympathy for them from that interview, because they did come across as sincere. And you cannot simply dismiss these accusations and these concerns, and it is absolutely in keeping with an elitist, closed-off royal institution that there would be racist attitudes there. And it goes right back to, as you said, it is by definition racist. The term blue blood, for example, which we bandy around, comes from a racist notion of distinguishing European royals from Moors and Jews and people from the Middle East. It is defined by racial purity.
Well, maybe sadly they're reflecting society, because from all I've seen so tragically in the last few days, so many women of colour coming forward It really saddened me to hear the daily slurs and prejudices that they go through. So maybe the royal family, if you're right, is a reflection of society, and isn't that sad?
I mean, I wonder if Jennie or the others, before we sort of start talking about how the monarchy might move on, if it can move on, do you think the statement from the palace was wrong? I mean, you know, Graham suggested that in many ways it was kind of questioning the accounts that Meghan and Harry had given of the mental health issues and the racism. Do you think that was wrong? Do you think they could have done more in that statement? I mean, I expected it to be a statement which would emphasize family over anything to do with the monarchy as an institution, and that they would try and say this was going to be something addressed behind closed doors. But I wonder if any of you had a view on how it might have been played differently. Were you surprised, Jennie, as a sort of veteran commentator?
No, I wasn't surprised. I don't think it went quite far enough, as I say, on the mental health issue. But what do you do if you are the head of the family and one person comes to you, I don't know who within the family, said, Granny or whoever, it didn't happen like that. I mean, that's not the way I saw it at all. I just don't recollect it. And then you've got your grandson going on television saying this is what happened. What do you do? I think she said factually, I don't know, but I'll take it at face value. The recollections are different, and they've got to have a good old sit down, talk it through, find out what went on, who said what to whom, and find some way out of it. I don't know.
Could you not imagine that they could have said, or would it be unrealistic to say, you know, we're appalled at the fact that Meghan and Harry have felt they experienced racism within the household or within the family? I mean, would that have just been completely unrealistic to expect that?
Well, they said that it was very concerning. I think it was extremely concerning, the racism. They singled that one out. They should have singled out mental health as well. But they said it was extremely concerning and they were going to investigate it.
Ben, did you want to come in?
Well, I was just going to say, in PR terms, in this sort of situation, less is more. And the difficulties, if they'd been even fuller in addressing issues, it just sets hairs running. I would, just while we're talking about mental health, actually, and we talk about the modernization of the institution, one of the things that has happened in Britain in the last decade is a massive decrease in the taboo of discussion of mental health. And actually, Prince William and Prince Harry have been a very important part of that shift in public opinion, but it's been one of the most dramatic things in the last decade. So, and if that's not modernization, princes talking about their mental health, I'm not sure what is.
Well, that's not. If I can just say, I mean,
yeah, go on.
I've had my own, I'm not going to go into details, but I've had my own experience with these things, and I applaud the fact that they were willing to step up and say that. But again, modernization is allowing people to have a free and fair discussion, holding people to account, and so on. I mean, but the point is that the events of this week have undone a lot of that work that's been done in the last 10 years on mental health, and it has challenged directly the work of people like BLM and the work on racial equality. Now, you mentioned, sorry, I forget, I think it was Ben or Edward mentioned 2 resignations this week, none from the royals. You know, why not? That's the accountability.
Ayesha,
do you want to come in? And then I've got a question for all of you. Yeah.
I just felt that the statement, I think Ben's right from a PR point of view, and certainly when I was a political press advisor, if there was always a crisis, less is more. Like, you wanted to slim down every single word. You didn't want any extra fat that anybody could pour over all the psephology that goes into all of this. However, I felt like it was quite a passive aggressive statement, and it lacked like a bit of humanity, and this idea that, okay, there's a bit of racism that's gone on, we're going to leave it to us, we're going to sort it out. I think there could have been a bit more warmth in that statement, which is something from the Queen even sort of suggesting that she was going to talk to people, or because look, clearly relations are still good between Harry and the Queen, and she is the head of the firm. So I thought there could be more on that. Just on the issue of mental health, I feel that there's a lot of victim blaming going on here, going, oh, well, if Meghan was that, I mean, and this is the big Piers Morgan row, right? If Meghan was that ill, and how come she didn't get help, or even, what do people want? Do people, people seem to forget that celebrities are still quite isolated as people. And if you're a celebrity and you're in the eye of a storm, and Meghan was in the eye of a media storm, she was pregnant, every detail of her life was being briefed out, from what colour she was going to paint the nursery. Do we not think that it probably would have leaked really badly as well if she had been asked and got given mental health? And then there would have been stories in the press about that as well. And I think people just have such, I think people don't realize that even though people are celebrities, they have human feelings as well. You know, when Caroline Flack committed suicide not that long ago, everybody was so shocked, and there was the whole be kind, be kind. Now we have a woman who says she was pregnant and she was suicidal, and people are, I just don't believe her. She was making it up. She's an attention seeker. And I think that's it feels like it makes a mockery of all the prince's work. And also it shows that, you know, even though we think we're moving forward as a society, we still seem pretty cruel.
Can I come in on that, please?
Just yeah, go on, Ed. Yeah,
for some historical perspective, because I think we can explain some of the sort of the victim blaming and the way that certainly that Meghan and Harry's words weren't always taken at face value as kind of representative of a disbelief in this narrative of royal suffering more generally. Ever since the 1930s, the royals have gone on record, gone out publicly and talked about their suffering, whether it's about the burdens of kingship in the figure of King George VI, whether it's in the figure of a young Princess Elizabeth dedicating her life to the service of her people on her 21st birthday, in that famous broadcast from South Africa, but simultaneously talking about how difficult the duties and the constant program of service is. I think really since the 1990s, people have started to raise questions and ask questions. To what extent are these, if you like, the narratives of suffering embellished, exaggerated? They've always been part of the PR narrative. And I think some of the questions that have been asked sort of emerge from this sort of bigger question about how real is all of this? How much of it is performance? How much is it sort of, how much was the interview on Monday evening sort of a transparent window onto their souls? Because there certainly was a performative quality to it. But that is, of course, not to deny the fact that there has been suffering there. There has been trauma and tragedy.
Thank you, Ed. Well, let's just pan backwards a little bit or out from that particular immediate events. And I just want to kind of pose the question, is there a better way of doing monarchy? You know, is the institution redeemable? Can it be made relevant in any way, fit for purpose in the 21st century? Now, I know Graham is going to say absolutely no, and I want us to come to the question of what is an alternative realistically and how might we get there? But given where we are now, can anyone sort of think about, perhaps from precedents from the past, about where we might see change, evolution come? Or was the marriage of Harry and Meghan and what that signaled the best chance that the monarchy had of being seen to be visibly modernizing in the challenges of the sort of society now? I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts on
you could
change.
try and keep it and go down to the Dutch or Scandinavian monarchy model, which many of you will be more articulate about than me. But I think people, there is an element. I mean, and I think if you look at the postcards that we sell to tourists in central London, which is one way of understanding how foreigners see us, they're always about 20 or 30 years out of date. But actually, of course, they are important. They symbolize tradition. Heritage is something that the British themselves actually love and that bizarrely unites us. They also symbolize inequality. We, in our poll just before the interview. But it's also worth saying that for the British Council, we regularly look at the reputation of Britain and the image of Britain among younger people under 34s around the world, in India, in Canada, Japan, Russia, you name it. And Britain remains this sort of strange mixture of modernity and tradition. And the monarchy are still an important part of how others see us. And of course, we can argue about, revenue, etc., that they might or might not contribute via tourism. So I think people still, but you could downgrade the spend undoubtedly.
But isn't there also, I mean, the fact is the monarchy does not need the royal family. I mean, that's a relatively modern invention. I mean, I think, and the talk is that Charles would plan to, streamline it to focus on the immediate heirs. I mean, surely that would be one very visible sign of modernization, having a much more streamlined focus on simply the monarch and the direct heirs, and getting rid of the royal family, which, you know, was a kind of became an asset for the royal family historically, but now clearly has become really problematic and, you know, to the disadvantage. Ed, you wanted to come in there.
I think that was what was taking place, wasn't it? I remember seeing photographs of the wedding in, I think it was 2011. And you remember seeing, I think it was like the sort of the Super 7. And there was clearly already a sort of a reimagining in terms of the public image around the core group, the line of succession, and Harry, and whoever it was going to be that Harry ended up marrying. And I think, you know, there's clearly been a bit of thinking gone back into this since Harry's departure, because Charles has lost one of his sort of lieutenants, one of his otherwise reliable sons, and suddenly, like, these more peripheral royals have been drafted in. So we've seen the Wessexes sort of take on new and more public roles. And it remains to be seen, for example, if Andrew's daughters get drawn in as well. I think, in terms of picking up on Ben's point, economizing further, trying to downsize in terms of the family is entirely sensible. And I'd be interested in knowing a little bit more in terms of the poll information about what do the public think about this wider family as opposed to the core group?
Well, they're definitely much more in favour of the core group, Ed.
I mean, I suppose the challenge too is that, sure, have a core group, and we have seen the images. I mean, there was quite a deliberate series of images where we had the Queen, Charles, William and George, you know, really just focusing on this direct succession. But we also have a problem, of course, where the family are long livers, and we're going to have the next king is going to be, I mean, there's a backlog, and the king is going to be an aged king. And we also have to remember, and it's really important to put our discussion in the context of the broader global role that the monarchy has. Of course, the Queen is head of state in 15 other countries besides the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, a number of countries in the Caribbean. And, you know, maybe they're going to be kind of traveling by Zoom, but they need the wider members of the royal family to be in places, especially as Charles gets older. And I suppose, ironically, as Ed alluded to, I mean, the Wessexes, although they're not the kind of sexy, glamorous couple that capture the newspaper headlines, they are incredibly well respected. They do a lot of work, particularly in the Commonwealth and the Caribbean. And I mean, I don't know whether, Ben, you've done any wider polling on attitudes in other parts of the world. I noticed that there was a poll, I think, in New Zealand that was, you know, had tipped in favour of calls for a republic. There's obviously Barbados has already announced the fact that it wants to break the ties with the monarchy. Ben, have you got any polling?
Well, I mean, I haven't, nothing particularly springs to mind. I mean, obviously we're in 90 countries and we are polling, but I'm on Australian attitudes to the monarchy. But of course it ebbs and flows. Australia has a Republican moment, and then they sort of duck back from it. And I think, but overall, I think what's been interesting over the last 5 years, and I think this whole sort of conversation that we're having in a sense at a very macro level is about the problem in Britain, the problem with our racist institutions, our problems with ourselves, how we adapt and how we change. And what's interesting at the very macro level, and Brexit, of course, has brought on masses of self-loathing, etc. Both sides hate each other, or have hated each other. And we've talked even about the Meghan versus the palace being another form of Brexit. But what's interesting is at the macro level, actually attitudes to Britain haven't changed anywhere near as much globally over the last decade as have attitudes to the United States and attitudes to President Xi's China. And so actually Britain remain, you know, despite all of our problems and all of this and the ups and downs of the monarchy, that hasn't really affected the image of our country. And I think that's important to remember.
I'm not sure
sure
that's.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, I'm not sure that's really relevant to the. I just don't buy the idea that the monarchy is central to the way that people see us. It's part of it, and something you said before, Ben, is that, you know, people see it as part of it, but that's because it is part of it. If we get rid of it, they won't see it as part of it. I don't think it's going to damage our standing.
No.
And just very quickly on the Commonwealth, more than 96% of citizens of the Commonwealth do not have the Queen as their head of state. You know, 2/3 of countries in the Commonwealth do not have the Queen as their head of state. You know, the Commonwealth will function. It has almost nothing to do with the Queen and the royal family. You know, they co-opt it because it gives them some sense of purpose and PR. But, you know, the Commonwealth functions entirely independently of
Graham, your
royal
connection's
family.
breaking up a little bit. Ayesha, I was going to ask you, the Labour Party and the monarchy, where should they be on this? I mean, obviously we had that leaked report which talked about the fact they should be draping themselves in the Union Jack at any opportunity. I perhaps paraphrase inaccurately, but that was the gist. I don't think Keir Starmer's been asked for comment, or I haven't heard him comment on this recent royal row. What do you advise them to be doing around the issue of monarchy now and, of course, going forward?
So Keir Starmer has commented on it, actually. He has said that, he expressed, regret at it, and actually said that they should look at this. And he did mention the racism issue and said that they should have a look at it. So, I mean, there's stuff surfacing from, when he was younger, he was a Republican, he's not an, historically an avowed monarchist, but the Labour Party, one of the big rows within the centre, well, there's been so many big rows within the centre of the Labour Party, but certainly this idea of patriotism and what patriotism means and who owns patriotisms and what are the icons and the signals, there is a big row happening between the left and the right, if you like, of the Labour Party, saying, does loving your country mean loving the Queen, or does loving your country mean loving the NHS and backing the nurses in this row over, pay and things like that? But I think Keir Starmer, I think he had a radical start in life, but like many politicians that have their eyes on the prize of Downing Street, he's now quite a centrist dad. He has gone to the palace. He has received accolades. He's happily a sir. He was very proud to take his parents to the palace. He's not squeamish about the flag. So I don't think you're going to see from Keir Starmer a kind of let's lead the revolution to kind of get rid of the monarchy. But he's taken the knee on Black Lives Matter. He's had criticism for doing that. He is obviously taking on anti-Semitism within the Labour Party as well. Trying to deal with racial injustice is something that he has talked about a lot, and I do think it is an issue which is close to his heart. So I don't think he's going to do a running commentary on it, but I don't think he will be like Boris Johnson just doesn't want to get involved in this at all. I think he will lean into this, but on specific issues. But he's a very establishment guy now. He did run the Crown Prosecution Service. He's not Jeremy Corbyn.
No, certainly not. We've got a question from the chat from Sarah Ann Baker about the monarchy carrying out a diplomatic role, and I wonder if Jennie might want to bring her in on this. I mean, obviously you've been on lots of royal tours, and there's no doubt that the royal family, of course, they're invited by the Foreign Office to go on certain visits, and it's played an important role. I think in the before the Brexit vote, was it not the case that members of the royal family were kind of encouraged to go on a bit of a love bombing circuit of Europe? What kind of role should they play, have they played, and how significant is that? I mean, is that part of the function of monarchy that we can see as positive in the modern age?
Well, yes, I think so. I mean, I've travelled all around the world with the royals, and they do get the most incredible reception. I mean, even in Australia, frankly, I think it's rather ludicrous that our Queen or King should be head of state of Australia. It's daft, it seems to me. But nevertheless, when we're always told it's going to be pure apathy, no one's going to care. I mean, they do. They care in their hundreds of thousands and turn out to welcome them. It's bizarre, really, but. When they fly the flag in the way they do and carry out a whole series of really quite tedious engagements for them, and it's pretty hard work, I suppose they enhance the image of this country. It seems to improve bilateral relations, and in the wake of it, all the ministers go along and they have chats as well. I don't know whether a sort of rather anonymous head of state, a politician, or just a head of state who was not politically aligned would have the same charisma, the same effect. Not that I'm against having an elected head of state. I mean, I don't sit here as a raving monarchist. I love politics, and I love having your vote. So if this country wanted to get rid of the monarchy, well, fine and dandy. But I mean, every single poll shows that they are still viewed as being of great value.
Can I just quickly answer that point about the crowds and all the rest of it? I mean, they're celebrities, they're famous. People turn up to see celebrities. You know, I mean, I was, you know, the fact that it might be a president who isn't so famous turning up to do a diplomatic role, fine. I mean, most diplomacy is done by people that no one's ever heard of and never will hear of, and they're the ones that do it. I mean, and the idea that the ministers are trailing behind the royals who are blazing the way, it's the other way around. And you know, the royals need to look like they're busy and important, so they ask the Foreign Office to invite them along. But you know, most countries in the world are republics and function very well without a monarchy. They are of no benefit in trade and projection and all the rest of it. And you know, the fact that they are monarchs or royals does not in itself make them fascinating, because I can tell you that when the Dutch Queen abdicated a few years ago, the most common reaction I heard in this country was, I had no idea they had a monarchy. You know, it's not the royalty that makes them famous, it's the fact that they are British head of state that makes them famous.
Well, I'm not sure if I mean, who's the German head of state? Would the crowds turn up with that if he came over here? Or she? Who is it? Who's the German head of state?
This is the point. We don't need crowds turning out for heads of state. They're not there as crowd pleasers. You know, we have celebrities to do that.
I think many people think they're part of our collateral. They're part of our, you know, the British package. And yes, of course, we don't need them. But actually, as you can see, a public opinion. I mean, I come from a family of Marxist academics, so I find myself surprised to be saying this. But actually, public opinion is, you know, is pretty. We love heritage. We like tradition. Actually, I was astonished to be in the mall for the when was it? The 2002 Jubilee. It was like Mafeking night all over again.
Very quickly, I mean, because I know you should talking about. Keir Starmer talked about patriotism and the flag, and you mentioned tradition and heritage. None of these are bound up with the monarchy. I like tradition and heritage. I'm patriotic, which is why I do what I do, and I like our flag, and I'm very happy to wave it. You know, these are not parts of the monarchy, and they are not connected. And the fact that, as I said before, support for the monarchy is high, but it's fairly shallow because, you know, most people are fairly indifferent to the whole thing. They don't care. They're not interested. They weren't watching. I mean, 1,000 people. Sorry, 1 million people.
Yeah, I confess, I didn't watch the interview. I know people are saying, "Did you watch every second of that?" And I'm like, the vast majority of the British public who did not watch every second of that interview, actually. So yeah, I'd agree with that point.
I want us to talk. I mean, Graham, you can talk us through in a moment about exactly how you realistically see us potentially in your kind of, you know, vision move from where we are now to the abolition of the monarchy and a head of state, how that would really work. But I just want us to reflect a little bit on Charles, because, I mean, obviously when Jennie was reporting actively on the royals, you know, Charles became synonymous with the squidgy tapes, with Diana. Camilla was all over the press in the most horrific way, you know, describing her as a Rottweiler and so on. And there's been a massive rehabilitation of the image of Camilla. And when I talk to journalists, I mean, they say that she's a really great thing. She's a good laugh. She kind of, you know, she brings Charles out of himself a bit. She's very kind of humble as much as you can be of somebody who's, you know, married into the royal family. And Charles has, in many ways, having been seen as a bit of a tree-hugging loony back in the 1990s, in many ways has now been seen to be having led the charge of environmentalism. And so, you know, I was kind of thinking maybe there's a future for an environmental monarchy, really going big on Charles as the environmental monarch. And I just wonder the sort of panel's reflections on that, and whether there's mileage in that, or whether the immediate crisis that, you know, of Charles apparently having cut off his son, although, you know, clearly some of that, you know, the details of that we don't really know. I wonder, you know, could Charles be better than we might imagine, I suppose? Jennie, do you want to just come in on that first?
Well, I know Charles a little bit. I've had, you know, sit down one-to-ones with him at Highgrove, and I think he's a decent man. I think he's a deep-thinking man. He was, as you say, a man ahead of his time. And I think he really cares a great deal about this country. And I think he cares a very great deal about diversity. And he believes the strength of our society is diversity. And I mean, he's a great multiculturalist. He believes in multi-faith. He wants the coronation oath changed so that it reflects and includes all faiths. So he's a very inclusive individual, deep thinking, and I think very well-meaning. And I think he has the makings of a very good king. And I rather question whether his popularity will be as poor as some of the panelists have made out.
Ayesha, do you want to come in on that? And then Ben, I don't know if you've done any sort of deep polling on Charles, which we perhaps can reflect.
We can talk a bit about that.
Okay, Ayesha, do you want to come in first?
So, you know, I've got no personal beef with Charles. In fact, he gave me my MBE and I was very grateful for it. And he was very nice. And we had a very lovely chat. So, you know, but I think in terms of the narrative, as I said earlier, you know, it's the Queen that has dominated the sense of service. And she is just synonymous with a selfless kind of service. I probably think the other royal who doesn't get much of a look in, who also does a lot of service, is Princess Anne, who actually is like a real trooper and she is very quietly busy and very quietly popular as well. She's seen as just doing a good job. I think she sort of echoes that feeling, you know, that sentiment of the Queen. I think the issue for Charles is that if you just ask your average person in the street, what do you know about Charles? It is, I'm afraid, the story of there's three of us in this marriage. I mean, that is the defining.
But not for my Ayesha. I mean, I would agree with you, but then I talk to my, you know, my students and I'm reminded, you know, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, they have no memory of Diana.
That's not true of the Crown.
Oh, okay, maybe that's changing. But their first thought, I mean, they just do not have the baggage that we have, you know, from the 1990s. I mean, they really don't. So there is a kind of opportunity, I think, for Charles.
I think there is. And I think I will, you know, Jennie is right. He's a deep thinking man. You know, he was a very early adopter of this, you know, the green agenda, which is now incredibly important, particularly with the younger generation. But this row does look bad in terms of, if you're talking about this younger generation, Anna, who don't really know him, they will know him now because of this row. So look, I think he will be a good king. I think he will be a thoughtful king. I think he will be a diligent king. But I just don't think the country is just going to have this same mad affection. And remember, I think the affection for the Queen has come over time. You know, the Queen's had her ups and downs, you know, even quite recently with all the Diana business and everything. I would say personally, for me, I would say it's been the last 10 to 15 years that the Queen has really solidified her affection in the public, just because she's done it for such a long time. So I think Charles will, you know, I don't think he'll be a bad king, but I just don't think he's going to be as remarkable as what's gone before him because of her history, unless he does something really radical, like say, I'm only going to be king for 5 years and then hand over to my son.
Interesting idea. The Queen, I was just going to say the Queen's popularity. I mean, we've got data going back to 1984, and it's been remarkably consistent. She's the sort of the other personalities in the court go up and down, but actually her ratings are pretty strong. I mean, as Ayesha's correct in the sense that the Olympics was this amazing feel-good moment, and then, you know, and the Queen was having a big birthday, etc. But so there was a bit of a lift, but actually it's been remarkably consistent. I mean, if we go back further, of course, I think this is the other thing we should remember. The monarchy has gone through periods of huge unpopularity, much greater than we're talking about now in the long run in history, and yet here we are.
Have you, just before I go to Ed, who's obviously can provide a bit of that historical context, but have you done detailed polling on support for the Queen by age group? I mean, is she the most popular?
I mean, she's more popular with older people. I mean, and so that the whole, I mean, the young people are much more, you know, associate much more with Wills and Harry, and that, you know, and that was part of the that was another sign of modernization to me, that they'd put the young princes to the fore. They have a new audience, so to speak, in their PR, as you might put it. But yes, so there is an age difference, but the Queen is respected, you know, across the age groups. But yeah, yeah.
And what about Charles and Camilla? How's their polling gone?
Well, they've gone up and down. I mean, there was a period, there was a wobble when, of course, he married Camilla, and you know, people at the time, 15 years ago, were less favorable to her. I mean, I think, again, as I say, my main point here is until he does the job, we just don't know how it will go, and that he could do a terrible interview with somebody and it will be a disaster, or it may turn out to be just something different than we might all turn out to be pleasantly surprised, I suppose, is the, well, not perhaps, but we just we literally don't know. At the moment, he's actually relatively, you know, it's not that he's unpopular, he's just relatively low profile. The number of people who say they like him is the same as Princess Anne.
Ed, have you got some thoughts you want to?
I think this brings us back to the sort of bigger discussion of what does the future of the monarchy look like, and I think the theme of advocacy is a really important one, in that we have seen certainly the younger generation sort of carve out roles where they have spoken out very powerfully, often on particular topics, mental health being one of them, for example, but increasingly also environment. And Charles, I think, has always had this association with environmentalism, and I can see very much him trying to continue to promote that part of his image. And yet I thought it very interesting and possibly significant, maybe, that a tension was emerging, in that it was William who launched the Earthshot Prize. And I wondered whether there had been some form of breakdown, either between Kensington Palace and Clarence House, as to who is really the environmentalist king in waiting. Is it Prince Charles, or is it indeed Prince William?
I think, isn't there also this question of kind of authenticity? Because I mean, Harry and William were able to speak out about mental health because they had been through some mental health struggles themselves because of their mother. Charles has been able to speak out about environmentalism because he's, you know, through his work and his estates, they've done that. But I don't know if any of you saw the Commonwealth programme on the BBC last Sunday. And I mean, it was just really awkward. I mean, it was members of the royal family talking to people in different Commonwealth countries, and it just literally showed them in every sense being out of touch and kind of shining a light on what was going on, but being completely removed from it and not having direct experience. And it just feels the challenge to have a monarchy that is authentic and what that really means and looks like. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that looks like for the future. Graham, we've got 10 minutes left, and I want Graham to give you the opportunity to, I mean, obviously we know your dream. We know your dream is for an elected head of state, but
let's not call it.
But can you talk? Well, talk us through. Let me ask the question. Just from where we are now.
Yeah.
What would need to happen and when, and how would that process evolve, and how to get to where we'd have an elected head of state?
Well, very quickly, because I appreciate we're running out of time. I'm going to sort of start that by picking up on something that's just been, has been said about, you know, the issue about environmental king. There's nothing more political about than the environment. It is hugely political. So you cannot have a king going on about the environment as if it's a fluffy issue. The way in which we deal with climate change is going to be answered by who pays the price for dealing with it, and the vast majority of the damage to the environment is caused by very rich people flying around in helicopters and having huge homes to heat and all the rest of it. Prince Charles is a hypocrite on the environment, and he's not ahead of the time on the environment. He has his very niche views on the environment, which a lot of other environmentalists disagree with. And if you do like him and you think he's a great person, then my answer would be, then vote for him. And this comes to the point, is that, you know, it is not difficult to imagine a Britain without a monarchy. We're not talking about President Trump or President Macron. What we're talking about is a parliamentary democracy where we elect everybody, where we still have a prime minister drawn from the House of Commons, where we get rid of the House of Lords and replace it with elected politicians, because people that make decisions should be representative and accountable. You know, it's been suggested that the monarchy is now more accountable because it publishes some of its finances. You know, it's been, as I said, it's been compared unfavorably to MI5 on the level of secrecy. And you then elect a head of state similar to what you have in Ireland and Germany, who is there to hold a limited constitutional role. Now, I have been told time and again that by monarchists that the Queen holds that role, but she does not. You know, she does not play a meaningful constitutional role because she has all of her powers over to the Prime Minister, as we saw with the prorogation. Now, in Ireland, they have a parliamentary system where they have a Prime Minister, where they have a written constitution which puts limits on the powers of Parliament and the government. And if the Parliament and government step over those limits, such as passing a law which is unconstitutional, the President can refuse to sign it, and there are mechanisms for dealing with that. But on the whole, the President is there representing the Irish people in Ireland and also the Irish diaspora around the world.
In terms
and they are very, very successful at doing that, and their poll ratings are higher than the Queen's in the last 3 examples.
But Graham, just to talk about the kind of the reality, I suppose, or where we are now, in order for there to be, we'd have to have a referendum, and
Yes.
no Tory government is going to advocate a referendum on the monarchy. So then we'd be looking at prospectively a Labour government tabling a referendum.
Well, I would pick you up on that because we have had 3 referendums under a Conservative-led government. We had electoral reform, Scottish independence and Brexit. On every single one of them, the government wanted us to vote for the status quo. And this happened in New Zealand in the early 90s, where both main parties wanted the status quo on electoral reform. But they were put into a position where they gave the people a referendum, and the people of New Zealand had the good sense to vote for change against the wishes of the party. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the governing party has to allow the referendum. Technically, you don't actually need a referendum. If Parliament feels that if there's a huge crisis that does dramatically shift public opinion away from the monarchy, Parliament can get rid of the monarchy overnight if it wishes to. But in the normal scheme of things, yes, you would need a referendum. The actual technical process, constitutional process of doing it is relatively simple. You write a fairly simple constitution or constitutional act that abolishes the Crown, abolishes the Privy Council, makes clear where those powers would go, and allows an election of a head of state. It's not complicated. It's actually relatively simple. But there are bigger things that we need to do. We need to not have a sovereign parliament. We need to have sovereign people enshrined in the constitution, with a parliament that has more power to challenge and to hold to account the government. The government is far too powerful in this country because of the Crown powers. So, there is a great deal that, at a basic level, is very simple to do. The politics of it are more challenging, and that's my job, to essentially push or encourage the British public to see this differently and to change their view on it. And I think that the big challenge there is to amplify our voice, because time and time and again I've done debates and had conversations where people change their mind when they stop and think about it. Because I said the other day on Twitter, and it got retweeted a lot of times, it should be a fundamental, unarguable point of article of faith in a democracy that no one inherits public office and everything else is detail. But the point is, beyond the point of principle, we have an institution which is not going too far to say that it's corrupt because of the abuse of money, the abuse of position, which is not to say it's a legal corruption, it's government sanctioned corruption. And then we have a government which is highly centralized in terms of its power.
But Graham, I think the public has no appetite for constitutional reform. And when we were given the chance to introduce PR, which personally I would like, we didn't even vote for that. So I'm skeptical about this happening.
That's specific to the circumstances of that. It was a very poorly run campaign.
We're in the last 5 minutes, so I just want to kind of give the panel opportunity to kind of lessons for the week, lessons from what's happened over the last few days. What are your takeaways, predictions? Do you think anybody's learned anything useful? Essentially, are we, as we ever were, a royal family that, diehard people will continue to support? Those who had hoped for more radical change are just fueled in their belief of the need for that change. Are we going to see a significant and sustained change in public attitudes? Any immediate, Jennie, is it unfair to come to you first? What are your takeaways from the week as you prepare to hopefully turn away from the microphone after lots of days of busyness?
Well, there are two sides to every argument, and there are two sides to what has gone on. I think the palace does have to look at itself, the institution, and I think it should become a little less hierarchical. I mean, a small example. I think it must have been quite hard for Meghan to come over here, an independent woman, an adult, as she says, and suddenly be told, "Oh, you're unequal. No, you can't arrive before your brother-in-law William and your sister-in-law because it's order of precedence," and ridiculous things like that. I mean, I quite accept the Queen needs to arrive somewhere at a big official function first, but the rest could rock up together, couldn't they? We wouldn't all faint. So there are small cosmetic changes like that. But I mean, basically, I think they need to investigate exactly what's going on and sort it out. And beyond that, I think it's very sad that I don't like the term Mexit, which was used. I think that's very pejorative. But what has happened, and Meghan feeling that she cannot be part of this family or this institution, is so sad, and has resulted in our country being divided yet again, when the couple, are all about cohesion and kindness and inclusivity. We seem to have just divided ourselves even more, and we're having these fierce and rather distasteful, but maybe useful debates.
Thanks, Jenny. Brilliant. Ed, can we come to you next? Any reflections from you to finish?
Yeah, okay. I'd actually pick up on what Jenny has just said in terms of, I think the sort of the immediate aftershock that we're feeling right now is partly to do with the revelations. It's also partly to do with the curtain briefly being lifted on the inner workings of the palace. I think people were somewhat surprised to hear it referred to as the firm, although that has been used for going on 80 years now. I think in terms of the legacy of this moment, it will be that the two sides, those supporters of Harry and Megxit, and those that don't sympathise with them, but instead potentially sympathise with the other side of the family. I think those two sides have become more entrenched. That would be my immediate feeling. And it will be interesting to see whether there is a role that the monarchy can play in, if you like, healing the divisions that currently exist. I think that will be maybe the story of the next 10, 20 years as they work to pull, hopefully, the British public together.
And of course, there may very well be an opportunity visibly to see whether that's been achieved. When Prince Philip, finally dies, there's going to be the challenge of, what a royal family funeral, I guess, might look like. Well, let's go to Ben, and then Graham, and then finally Ayesha. Ben.
I'll be quick because I'm looking at the clock. I think this is just this whole episode is just another sign of, in a way, of how the monarchy is changing. The fact that you've got princes doing Hollywood type interviews, this is modernization, actually, and it's confronting the messy world that we live in. Yes, they are behind. They are not at the front. They are not at the front of the wave in terms of their liberal attitudes and how society is changing, and they're not. But in a way, they're not meant to be. And so I think they proved, like capitalism, remarkably adaptable, and probably will keep going.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Graham.
Yeah. I mean, they keep going because people allow them to keep going, and they are protected by huge amounts of secrecy. But I think that this is the one similarity with the 1997 crisis and the public reaction to the royal reaction to Diana's death, is that it was a huge jarring moment where the royals did not meet the expectations. People thought, well, hang on a minute, this isn't what we thought the royals were. And I think this is also true, briefly mentioned, the Crown is a lot of people are saying, really, is that really what they like? I think this is going to just add to the damage, and the sort of the heat shield provided by the Queen is not going to be there for much longer. I do think someone once said that the problem with the monarchy is it makes otherwise intelligent people say some very silly things, and there's been a lot of that this week. Not, of course, this evening, but a lot of that this week. And one of the tragedies is pitching the team Meghan versus the team Windsor. That's not what it's really about. It's about the fact that a young woman who has come on TV and said that she was racially or suffered racism in her family and in this public institution was then dismissed and derided. And a young woman who said that she was so depressed that she was looking at harming herself or possibly taking her own life was then dismissed and derided. That has done significant damage, not just to the monarchy, but to those causes of mental health and tackling racism. I think that's the biggest.
Yeah, important point to make. Ayesha, and finally to you.
Well, I mean, I think earlier Jenny said that, perhaps the royal family are just the same as British society. And I think we have seen that this week. They are no better than the British society. And actually, they're no better than Meghan Markle's family. They can be as dysfunctional. And I'm afraid, I think this whole week and this whole incident has really shamed this country, because at the core of it, as Graham says, the story is this is the first woman of colour that has entered the royal family. She was bullied and she was hounded by the press and by the palace and by people on social media out of this country. She spoke of her mental health, she spoke of her dark moments, and she has been mocked by one of the most powerful men in British television. Actually, and Graham, my slight anxiety with your elected head is, I think Piers Morgan would be the elected head of state right now. So just be careful of that. But I think on a, and sorry, Jenny, I know you don't like the phrase Megxit. You're gonna, I say, I mean, Welsh independent, Wexit. That is just the phrase. Skexit's coming down the track next. But in terms of, you know, we are so polarized, and I think what it has shown is that we used to sort of divide ourselves on left, right, Labour, Conservative. I think these culture wars are really, really polarizing now. And I think this story has bled right into it. But to try and end it with a tiny bit of hope and optimism, I think the one thing that a lot of young people have taken away from it, a lot of women and a lot of people of colour have taken away that Meghan particularly and Harry, there's been a lot of courage there, because normally people of colour and women and anyone who's a minority being bullied, the rule is you never stand up to it, you never take these people on, they're too powerful. And she has done that, you know, with him by her side. And I think a lot of certainly young women I'm speaking to are saying, you know, this is a big moment for us. We have seen a woman of colour stand up for herself and win. She's won victory in the courts. She's had her say. I know a lot of people sort of don't like her, but she has refused to just be cowed and suck it up. And I think for a lot of people of colour, that is a big deal. And I was really struck by Alex Beresford. I know we're all talking about Piers Morgan, but I think the winner out of this was Alex Beresford, the weatherman, the biracial weatherman, who confronted Piers Morgan with a lot of grace, but true grit. And to coin a phrase, spoke his truth about how he felt. And of course, it was Piers Morgan that sort of huffed off. So I think the optimism, the teachable moment from this is that a lot of people are going to say, I don't just have to be bullied. I don't just have to suck it up because that's what the rules say. So that's the positive takeaway, a bit of courage, I think, and courage, you know, calls to courage everywhere, as is the phrase.
Ayesha, what a brilliant place to end. Guys, thank you so much. This is the first of, I hope, as many of these public discussions and debates. I think, you know, pandemic or no pandemic, actually, this kind of forum works really well. Huge thanks to Jennie Bond. Among other things, you can read Jennie Bond's book, Reporting Royalty, which I was reading the other day, which is fascinating. And you can find it on, no doubt, online and in all good independent bookshops, I very much hope, when they open. Dr. Ed Owen's book, Ed, do you want to give it a full title before I mash it up?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's called The Family Firm, Monarchy, Mass Media and the British Public, 1932 to 53.
Check it out. It's excellent. It's scholarly but accessible, and it's really good stuff. Ben Page and IPSO Mori, you can follow him on Twitter. Obviously, IPSO Mori are polling things all the time. Is that the best place to follow and find you, Ben?
Yeah, I'm on most channels, but yeah, Twitter's fun.
Okay, cool. Ayesha is kind of everywhere, but let's shout out to your Times Radio show, Ayesha. When is it? Saturday evenings?
It's Saturday and Sunday 4 till 7. And if you want a bit of history about Prime Minister's questions, I wrote a book about the history of PMQs called Punch and Judy Politics. So if anyone's interested in that, you can read that.
Oh yeah, that sounds great. Brilliant. And finally, Graham, presumably your website and then Twitter for your activities with the Republic campaign.
Yeah, well, republic.org.uk where all the links, and we have a YouTube channel, so you can come and watch me talk for even longer if you want to. So there's plenty to find out on the website there.
Amazing. Guys, we'll leave it there. We'll all go and have our gin and tonics. Thank you so much, everybody. Let's do this again. Appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for questions in the chat. I hope I've managed to feed those in. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you all. Good evening.